Alright, microphone test. Alright, yes sir, it works. I don't have a lot of time tonight, don't have time to explain any schedule stuff, so we're just gonna get right into the stories because I've had a lot of work and stuff today. And alright, here we go. First story time of Battleninja. Alright, so this is for my creative writing class. First we got Kew Gardens by Virginia Woolf. And I guess she lived from 1882 to 1941, but I need to know about the story overall, so let Battleninja begin the audiobook. From the oval-shaped flower bed there rose perhaps 100 stalks spreading into heart-shaped or tongue-shaped leaves, halfway up, unfurling at the tip, red or blue or yellow petals, marked with spots of color (they spelled color wrong) raised upon the surface, and from the bed, blue or yellow gloom of the throat emerged a straight bar, rough with gold dust and slightly clubbed at the end. The petals were voluminous enough to be, I assume that says stirred, but I'm part illiterate, so by the summer breeze. When they moved, the red, blue, and yellow lights passed one over the other, staining an inch of the brown earth beneath with a spot of the most intricate color. This also helps me just pronounce words out loud, helps my reading out loud skills. So the light fell upon either the smooth gray the light fell upon either the smooth gray back of a pebble, or the shell of a snail with its round circular veins, or falling into a raindrop, they expanded with such intensity of red, blue, and yellow, the thin walls of water that were once expected them to burst and disappear. Damn, a lot of color in this, huh? Instead, the drop was left a second silver gray once more, and the light snow now settled upon the flesh of a leaf, revealing the branching thread of fiber beneath the surface, and again it moved on and spread its illumination in the vast green spaces beneath the dome of the heart-shaped and tongue-shaped leaves. So we got heart-shaped and tongue-shaped leaves, along with the symbolism of the colors red, blue, and yellow being the primary colors. Ooh. Then the breeze stirred rather more briskly overhead, and the color was flashed into the air above, into the eyes of men and women who walk in Kew Gardens in July. These figures of men and women straggled past the flower bed with a curiously irregular movement, not unlike that of a white, not, oh my god, I just can never speak when it's late. Not like These figures of men and women straggled past the flower bed with a curiously irregular movement not unlike that of the white and blue butterflies who cross the turf in zigzag flights from bed to bed. The man was about 6 inches from the woman, strolling carelessly, while she bore on with greater purpose, only turning her head now and then to see that the children were not too far behind. The man kept this distance in front of the woman purposely, though perhaps unconsciously, for he wished to go down with his thoughts. He wished to go on with his thoughts. 15 years ago, I came here with Lily, he thought. We sat somewhere over there by a lake, and I begged her to marry me all throughout the hot afternoon. How the dragonfly kept circling around us. How clearly I see the dragonfly and her shoe with the square silver buckle at the toe. All the time I spoke, I saw her shoe, and when it moved impatiently, I knew without looking up what she was going to say. The whole of her seemed to be in her shoe. This is just, what is this story? It's just not processing in my head right now. And my love, my desire, were in the dragonfly. For some reason, I thought that if it settled there, on that leaf, the broad one with the red flower in the middle of it, if the dragonfly settled on that leaf, she would say yes at once. But the dragonfly went round and round. It never settled anywhere. Of course not. Happily not. Or I shouldn't be walking here with Eleanor and the children. Tell me, Eleanor, Do you ever think of the past? Why you ask, Simon? Because I've been thinking of the past. I've been thinking of Lily, the woman I might have married. Well, why are you silent? Do you mind thinking of the past? For me, a square silver shoe buckle. I just skipped this line. Why should I mind, Simon? Doesn't one always think of the past? In the garden with men and women lying under the trees? Aren't they one's past, all that remains of it? Those men and women, those ghosts lying under the trees, one's happiness, one's reality? For me, a square silver shoe buckle and a dragonfly. For me, a kiss. Imagine six little girls sitting before their easels 20 years ago, down by the side of a lake, painting their water lilies, the first red water lilies I'd ever seen, and suddenly a kiss, there on the back of my neck, and my head shook all afternoon so that I couldn't paint. I took out my watch and marked the hour when I would allow myself to think of the kiss for 5 minutes only. It was so precious. The kiss of an old, grayed-haired woman with a wart on her nose, the mother of all my kisses in my life. Come, Caroline. Come, Hubert. Who's the narrator here? I'm seeing 20 million different names. They walked past the flower bed, now walking four abreast, and soon diminished in size among the trees and looked half transparent as the sunlight and shade swam over their backs in large trembling, irregular patches. In the oval flower bed, the snail had been stained red, blue, and yellow for the space of 2 minutes or so, now appeared to be moving very slightly in its shell, and next began to labor over the crumbs of loose earth which broke away and rolled down as it passed them. It appeared to have a definite goal in front of it, differing in this respect from the singular high-stepping angular green insect who attempted to cross in front of it, and waited for a second with its and that I assume that says in that trembling, as if in deliberation, and then stepped off as rapidly and strangely in the opposite direction. Brown cliffs with deep green lakes, and the hollows flat, blade-like trees that waved from root to tip, round boulders of gray stone, vast crumbled surfaces of a thin crackling texture, all these objects lay across the snail's progress between one stalk and another to his goal. Before he had decided whether to circumvent the arched tent of a dead leaf or to rest it there, came past the bed the feet of other human beings. Greetings, burning buckets. Hope you're enjoying the story so far. This is homework, but since it's also reading, I thought I'd just read it out loud and bother all my sweet mates in the process and stream it. You're editing the video? Alright. Word. Always making those fire videos. Never stopping the grind. This time, they were both men. Whoa. The younger of the two wore an expression of perhaps unnatural calm. He raised his eyes and fixed them steadily in front of him, while his companion spoke, and directly his companion had done speaking, he looked on the ground again, and sometimes opened his lips only after a long pause, and sometimes did not open them at all. The elder man had a curiosity, uneven, and shaking method of walking, jerking his hand forward and throwing up his head abruptly, rather in the manner of an impatient carriage horse waiting of tired outside a house. But in the man these gestures were irresolute and pointless. I assume irresolute, I don't know. He talked he talked almost incessantly. He, he smiled to himself and then began to talk, as if the smile began to answer. He was talking about spirits of the dead, who, according to him, were even now telling him all sorts of odd things about their experiences in heaven. Heaven was known to the ancients as Thiesley, William, and now, with this war, the spirit matter is rolling between the hills like thunder. This has to be just a metaphor for a nature story. I have no idea what's going on right now. He paused, seemed to listen, smiled, jerked his head, and continued. You have a small electric battery and a piece of rubber to insulate the wire? Isolate? Insulate? Well, skip the details. No good going into details that would be understood, and in the short little machine stands any convenient position by the head of the bed. We will say, on a net mahogany stand, all arrangements being properly fixed by workmen under my direction. The widow applies her ear and summons the spirit by sign as agreed. Woman, widows, woman in black. Oh, it's a funeral. That's sad. Here he seemed to have caught sight of a woman's dress in the distance, which in the shade looked a purple black. He took off his hat, placed his hand upon his heart, hurried towards her, muttering and gesticulating feverishly. But William caught him by the sleeve and touched the flower with the tip of his walking stick in order to divert the old man's attention. After looking at it for a moment in some confusion, the old man bent his ear to it and seemed to answer a voice speaking from it, for he began talking about the forests of Uruguay, which he had visited hundreds of years ago in company with the most beautiful young woman in Europe. He could be heard murmuring about forests of Uruguay, blanketed with the wax petals of tropical roots, night tang, I think that says night tangles, whatever it is, sea beaches, mermaids, and women drowned at sea. As he suffered himself to be moved on by William, upon whose face the look of social patience grew slowly deeper and deeper. Following his steps so closely as to be slightly puzzled by his gestures came two elderly women of the lower middle class, one stout and ponderous, the other rosy-cheeked and nimble. Like most people of their situation, they were frankly fascinated by any signs of entrictus and yeah, um, this word right here, people with the E. Beckoning a disordered brain, especially in the well-to-do, but they were too far off to be certain whether the gestures were merely eccentric or genuinely mad. After they had said the old man's God damn it, the old man's back in silence for a moment and given each other a queer, sly look, they went on energetically piecing together their very complicated dialogue. Neil, Bert, Loss, Chess, Phil, Pa. He says, I says, she says, I says, I says, I says. My Bert, Sis, Bill, Granddad, the old man, Sugar. Sugar, flowers, nippers, greens, sugar, sugar, sugar. The ponderous woman looked through the pattern of falling words at the flowers standing cool, firm, and upright in the earth, with a curious expression. She saw them as a sleeper walking away from a heavy sleep, sees a brass candlestick reflecting the light in an unfamiliar way, and closes his eyes and opens them. And seeing the brass candlestick again, finally starts broad awake and stares at the candlestick with all his powers. So the heavy woman came to a standstill opposite the oval-shaped flower bed, and ceased even to pretend to listen to what the other woman was saying. She stood there, letting the words fall over her, swaying the top part of her body slowly backwards and forwards, looking at the flowers. Then she suggested that they should find a seat and have their tea. The snail had now considered every possible method of reaching his goal without going around the dead leaf or climbing over it. Let alone the effort needed for climbing a leaf, he was doubtful whether the thin texture which vibrated with such an alarming crackle when touched even by the tip of his horns would bear his weight. And this determined him to finally creep beneath it, for there was a point where the leaf curved high enough from the ground to admit him. He had just inserted his head in the opening and was taking stock of the high brown roof and was getting used to the cool brown light when two other people came past outside on the turf. This time they were both young. A young man and a young woman. They were both in the prime of their youth, or even in that season which precedes the prime of youth, the season before the smooth pink folds of the flower have burst their gummy case, when the wings of the butterfly, though fully grown, are motionless in the sun. Lucky isn't Friday, he observed. Why, did you believe in luck? They make you pay sixpence on Friday. What's sixpence anyway? Isn't it worth sixpence? What is it? What do you mean by it? Oh, anything I mean. You know what I mean. Oh, thank God, it's almost over. Long pauses came between each of these remarks. They were uttered in toneless and monotonous voices. The couple stood on the edge of the flower bed and pressed together the end of her parasol deep down into the soft earth. The action, and the fact that his hand rested on top of hers, expressed their feelings in such a strange way, as these short, insignificant words also expressed something, words with short wings for their heavy body of meeting, inadequate to carry them far and thus alighting awkwardly upon the very common objects that surrounded them, and there and le and were to their inexperienced touch so massive, but who knows? So they thought as they pressed the parasol into the earth. What perceives aren't concealed in them? Or what slopes of ice don't shine in the sun on the other side? Who knows? Who has ever seen this before? Even when she wondered what sort of tea they gave at Kew, he felt that something loomed up behind her woods, behind her words, and stood vast and solid behind them, and the mist very slowly rose and uncovered. Oh, heavens! What were those shapes? Little white tables? And waitresses who looked first at her, then him. And there was a bill that he would pay with a real 2 shilling piece. And it was real, all real, he assured himself, fingering the coin in his pocket, real to everyone except to him or her. Even to him it began to seem real. And then, but it was too exciting to stand and think any longer, and he pulled the parasol out of the earth with a jerk, and was impatient to find the place once where one had tea with other people, like other people. Come along, Trissy. It's time we had our tea. Wherever does one ha- Wherever does one have one's tea? She asked with the oddest of thrill of excitement in her voice, looking vaguely around and letting herself be drawn to the grass path, trailing her parasol, turning her head this way and that way, forgetting her tea, wishing to go down there and then down there, remembering orchards and cranes among wild flowers, a Chinese pagoda and a crimson-crested bird, but he bore her on. Thus one couple after another, with much of the same irregular and aimless movement, passed the flower bed, and were enveloped in a layer of green-blue vapor, in which at first their bodies had substance and a dash of color, but later both substance and color dissolved in the green-blue atmosphere. How hot it was! I know, isn't it nice? I don't know. I remember one of you guys said how you wanted me to like read, so why not? It's for homework anyway. Kill two birds with one stone. I'm streaming. Where was I? Pause this long, moving to the next. How hot it was! So hot that even the thrush chose to hop, like a mechanical bird, in the shadow of the flowers, with long pauses between one movement and the next. Instead of rambling vaguely, the white butterflies danced one above another, making their white shifting flakes the outline of shattered marble column above the tallest flowers. The glass roofs of the palm house shone as if a whole market of shiny green umbrellas had opened in the sun, and in the drone of the aeroplane the voice of the summer sky murmured its fierce soul. Yellow and black, pink and snow white, shapes of all these colors, men, women, and children, were spotted for a second upon the horizon, and then, seeing the breadth of yellow that lay upon the grass, they wavered and sought shade beneath the trees. dissolving like drops of water in the yellow and green atmosphere, staining it faintly with red and blue. It seemed as if all gross and heavenly bodies had sunk down in the heat motionless, and lay huddled upon the ground, but their voices went wavering from them as if they were flames lollying from the thick, waxen bodies of candles. Voices. Yes, voices. Wordless voices. Oh no, you're good, sorry. Wordless voices, breaking the silence suddenly with depth of such contentment, such passion of desire, in the voices of children, just like the voices in my head, such freshness of surprise, breaking the silence. But there was no silence. All the time the motor omnibuses were turning their wheels and changing their gear like a vast net of Chinese boxes, all of wrought steel, turning ceaselessly one within another, the city murmured, on the top of which the voices cried aloud, and the petals of myriads of flowers flashed their colors into the air. Oh, what? There's more? Oh, I know that's another story. As all the colors flashed into the air. Professor watching? Oh no, I do have to write a one-page essay on one of these stories by the end. So this could only be a true story if Flash City is involved. Um, oh no, the story is so confusing that it might as well be about Flash City because I don't understand half of what's going on here. But in my wonderful, beautiful narrative mispronouncing, pausing audiobook edition of Kew Gardens by Virginia Woolf, that was that. And yeah, um, I guess yeah, time for was it the second story of the night? And that's gonna be probably about it. If I have time, I'll do sci-fi stories tomorrow during the day for my sci-fi class, which those get interesting, and those also get very fucking weird. Believe me, like I don't even know if I should just say nonchalantly out of context. Like they just get very fucking weird sometimes. Anyway, so that goes into a creative upload. Yes. Okay. All right. That was not it. Where's the PDF? All right. So we got about 8 pages of this. This is The Conscience of the Court by Zora Nally Hertzen. So, will you be joining Mace for a night on Warzone? Well, if you mean sometime this week, yes. If you mean tonight, absolutely not, because it is 12:40 at night on a Monday. Well, as now it's a Tuesday actually, but technically a Monday because when I wake up it's Tuesday, even though it's Tuesday right now. Anyway, I just want to make sure this is the right story before I begin. Yeah, Cassandra's girl. Okay, let's go. Conscience. See, I didn't know if it was conscience or conscience because conscience as a name, like, is that actually a name? You know? So like, I don't know. I didn't know, but thank you for correcting me there, Mr. Buckets. Really appreciate it. Take a short little break if anyone's anything to say. I just mentally preparing myself to read again, and then I have to write a quick little essay on these tomorrow morning. One whole page, which is not bad. It's just a minor inconvenience. Anyway, refresh my head. New story. The clerk of the court took a good. The clerk. God damn it. See, it's also good practice for reading out loud. The clerk of the court took a good look at the tall, brown-skinned woman with the head rag on. She sat on the third bench back with a husky officer beside her. The People versus Laura Lee Kimball. The policeman nudged. The woman the policeman nudged the woman to get her feet and led her up the broad rail. She stood there, looking straight ahead. The hostility in the room reached. her without her seeking to find it. Right? Well, we probably can assume what time period this takes place in. Unpleasant things were ahead of Laura Lee Kimball, but she was ready for this moment. It might be the electric chair. Oh, goddamn. Or the rest of her life in some big, loathsome jailhouse. Well, that's awful. Or even torn to pieces by a mob. But she had passed 3 long weeks in jail. She had come to the place where she could turn her face to the wall and feel neither fear nor anguish. So this here so-called trial was nothing to her but a form and a fashion of an outside show to the world. She could stand apart and look on calmly. She stood erect and looked up at the judge, charged with felonious and aggravated assault, mayhem, premeditated attempt murder on the person of one Clement Basely, I don't know, obscene and abusive language. Laura Lee Kimball, how do you plead? Laura Lee was so fascinated by the long named things that they were accusing her of that she stood there tasting over the words. Lawdy me, she mused inside herself. Look like I'd done every crime except. Looks like I'd done every crime excepting a Hebus corpse and stealing a mule. I'm sorry, did you just say conscience? That's what you said before when you typed in the chat. Alright, whatever. Anyway, carry on. Answer the clerk. The officer nudged Laura Lee. Tell them how you plead. Plead? I don't reckon I make out just what you mean by all that. She looked from face to face, and at last up at the judge, with bewilderment in her eyes. She found him looking over her studiously. The judge understood the look in her face, but he did not interfere so promptly as he ordinarily would have. This was the man-killing bear-cat of a woman that he had heard so much about. Though a spare of fat, she was built strongly enough, all right. Okay, not reading not that sentence out loud. Gray-green eyes, large and striking, looking out of a chestnut brown face. A great abundance of almost straight hair, only partly hidden by the high knotted colored handkerchief about her head. Somehow this woman did not look fierce to him at all, yet she had beaten a man within the inch of his life. Here was a riddle to solve. With the proud, erect way she held herself, she might be some savage queen. The shabby house dress she had detracted nothing from the shabby house dress she had on detracted nothing from this impression. She was a challenge to him somehow or other. Perhaps you don't understand what the clerk means, Laura, the judge found himself saying to her in a gentle voice. He wants you to say whether you're guilty on the charges or not. Oh, I don't know. Don't even know if he was talking to me or not. Much obliged to you, sir. Laura Lee sent his honor a shy smile. Deed, I don't know if I'm guilty or not. I hit the man after he hit me, to be sure. Mr. Judge, but if I am guilty, I don't know for sure. All them big words and all. The clerk shook his head in exasperation and quickly wrote something down. Laura Lee turned her head and saw the man on the hospital cot swaddled all up in the bandage rags. Yes, that was the very man who caused her to be here where she was. All right, Laura Lee, the judge said. You can take your seat now until you're called on. The prosecutor looked a question at the judge and said, We can proceed. The judge nodded and then halted things as he looked down at Laura Lee. The defendant seems to have no lawyer to represent her. Now he leaned forward and spoke to Laura Lee directly. If you have no money to hire yourself a lawyer to look out for your interests, the court will appoint one for you. There was a pause, during which Laura Lee's conviction, during which Laura's, during which Laura Lee covered a lot of ground. Then she smiled faintly at the judge and answered him, "No, sir. I thank you, Mr. Judge. Not to turn you, No short answer, but I don't reckon it would do me a bit of good. I'm not mighty much obligated to you just the same. The implications penetrated instantly, and the judge flushed. This unlettered woman had called up something that he had not thought about for quite some time. The campus of the University of Virginia and himself, as a very young man there, filled with a reverence. I'm gonna reverence, yeah. Like I said before, reading hard out loud, hard. So, for his profession amounting to an almost holy dedication, his fascination and awe as a professor traced the more than 200 years of growth and the concepts of human rights and justice that brought him to this that brought him to his greatest hero, John Marshall, and his inner resolve to follow in the great man's footsteps, and even to interpretations of human rights of his abilities allowed. No, he had not thought about all this for quite some time. The judge flushed slowly and deeply. All I did was grab him by his heels and frail the pillar of the porch with him a few times. Blew him there. The prosecutor was moving swiftly, but some. Am I reading this? I must be reading this in the right. Reverence. Reverence. Ah, thank you, buddy. All right. Blew him there. The prosecutor was moving swiftly, but somehow his brain cynicism. I'm sorry, Dan. I like I said before, it's just gonna happen. You just gotta bear with me here. Cynicism offended the judge. He heard 12 names called, and just like that, the jury box was filled and sworn in. Rapidly now, witnesses took the stand, and their testimony was all damaging to Laura Lee. The doctor who told how terribly Clement Basely had been hurt. Left arm broken above the elbow, compound fracture of the forearm, two ribs cracked. Oh my god. Concession con is that I assume that's concision con concussion. Oh my god, split up into two. I'm sorry, I just can't read. Concussion. Where was it? Concussion of the brain and various internal injuries. Two neighbors who had heard the commotion and arrived before the house in time to see Laura Lee fling the plaintiff over the gate onto the street. The six arresting officers all got up and had their say. It was very bad for Laura Lee, a two-legged she-devil no less. Clement Basely was borne from his cot to the witness stand, and he made things look 100 times blacker. His very appearance aroused a bumble of pity and anger against the defendant. The judge had to demand quiet repeatedly. Bensley's testimony blew strongly on the hot coals. His story was that he had come in conflict with his defendant by loaning a sizable sum of money to her employer. The money was to be repaid at his office. When the date was long past due, he had gone to the house near the river, just off Riverside Drive, to inquire why Miss Cherbourne had not paid him, nor even come to see him and explain. Imagine his shock when he wormed it out of the defendant that Miss Cherbourne had left Jacksonville. Further, he detected evidence that the defendant was packing up the things in the house. The loan had been made, $600 on the furnishings of the entire house. He had doubted that the furnishings were worth enough for the amount loaned, but he had wanted to be generous to a widow lady. Seeing the defendant packing away the silver, he was naturally alarmed, and the next morning went to the house with a moving van to seize the furniture and protect the loan. The defendant, surprised, attacked him as soon as he appeared at the front door, and injured him as he was, and would have killed him if help had not arrived in time. Laura Lee was no longer a spectator at her own trial. Now she was in a flaming rage. She would have leaped to her feet as the man pictured Miss Clestine as a chest and a crook. And again, as he sat up there, as he sat up there and calmly lied about the worth of the furniture, all of those wonderful antiques, this man making out that they did not equal minching $600, that they did not equal his minching $600. That lie was a sin and a shame. The people was a meddlesome and unfriendly passel, and had no use for the truth. It brought back to her in a taunting way that her husband, Tom, had told her over and over again. This world had no use for the love and friending that she was ever trying to give. It looked now that Tom could be right. Even Mince, even Ms. Celestine had turned her back on her. Happy Mirror Math Day? You're gonna have to elaborate on that, buddy, because I never even heard of that day. When did this happen? Oh, it's this. Oh, whoever was sent. Oh, that photo, bro. He looks like Mr. Electric from Shark Boy and Lava Girl. That's funny. All right, where was I? Uh, the House of the People, all by herself. She had ever disbelieved Tom and had to get 49 before she found out the truth. Well, just as the old folks said, it's never too long for a bullfrog to wander off a stiff bosom shirt. He's bound to get it dirty sometime or other. Sometime or other. You have testified, Laura Lee, heard the judge talking, that you came in contact with the defendant through a loan to Mrs. J. Stewart Sherborne, her employer, did you not? Yes, Your Honor, Beasley answered promptly and glibly. That being true, the court cannot understand why that note was not offered in evidence. Beasley glanced quickly at the prosecutor and lowered his eyes. I just didn't see why it was necessary, Your Honor. I have, but it is not only pertinent, it is of the utmost importance to this case. I order it sent for immediately and placed in evidence. The tall, lean, black-haired prosecutor hurled a surprised and betrayed look at the bench. Then, after a pause, said in a flat voice, "The state rests." What was this? What was in the atmosphere crawled over Laura Lee like reptiles. The silence shouted that her goose was cooked. But even if the sentence was death, she didn't mind. Celestine Buford Sherborne had failed her. I need a drink. It has been about 3 years, hasn't it? That's kind of nuts. Putting our heads together, Red and I figured out his vital statistics, including his mother's name before she had married. The question of who hired him and when he had worked was tougher. As he recalled it, Nancy, the president of the senior class, had passed him on the street and yelled out, "Come over onto the archive and fold papers a while." Since he worked 5 nights a week in the drugstore and we only folded papers on Wednesday, he figured it must have been a Wednesday when he was off. And it was winter because there was snow on the ground. Wow, that's crazy. Rate of pay. We knew to be 75 cents because that's what the shit said. But he couldn't remember how long he had been there. He said he was quite surprised to get paid at all because he had spent half an hour in a corner rehashing a basketball game. That one's for you, Dan. That word right there in the story, basketball game. And by the time he got to the folding table, there was a terrible argument growing about how many light years it was to the moon, and he couldn't even remember doing any work at all, though he was supposed to have folded a few papers. I bought him a soda while we threshed these fine points out, and finally arrived home exactly 1 hour late for supper. That evening, and several thereafter, the rest of them dropped in at the office for help on their blanks. According to law, I was then serving at time and a half, or 60 cents an hour, and on that basis my advice ran to a little over $6. I still haven't paid myself. Early in the second week of our routine, checked by the Wage and Hour Division of the Labor Department, we stood charged with operating in interstate commerce, running some sort of sweatshop for sweet shop, sweatshop for kids, running some sort of sweet shop for kids under 16, and discriminating against corporation executives. I couldn't help wondering when our man would get down to brass tacks and look onto four regular employees. I didn't have to wait long. I returned to the office one afternoon, late after out being at a farm demonstration. The investigator had been there most of the time I was gone and had taken each employee off into a corner for cross-examination. Oh, I see, that's like an old-timey ad, I guess. Alright, I'm just gonna see real quickly how long this story is, because it doesn't look like I'll finish tonight, but you know, it depends. There's what? I'm on page 2 of the story. Probably about like 5 pages, something like that. Alright, anyway, where was I? Cross-examination. According to the men, or rather the boys, their average age is 24. He found something sinister in the fact that the 19-year-old Linotype operator made as much as 110 a week. He showed great distress when he learned we didn't have a time clock, but just paid the men whatever they said we owed them at the end of the week. There was also something irregular about the fact that we paid the foreman a salary and gave him paid vacations, a practice we have since abandoned. Very little work was done on the day of those interviews. Not that the actual questioning took so long, but by the time everybody had compared notes and told what he had said and they said, it was about quitting time. So, rather than run into overtime, we closed up and I stuck around till 2 or 3 in the morning to get the work finished and incidentally get myself some more overtime. The chief result to date of the wage and hour visit is that we had to go out and get an automatic newspaper press that folds as it prints, thus eliminating all the part-time workers and the lady who fed up the old press. Although we had hoped to put one in eventually, we were in no position financially to do it at this time. Even though we took it apart, moved it, and put it together ourselves, it had cost us $8,000 so far, despite the fact it is at least 45 years old. I don't know how, I don't know what the verdict of the wage and hour people will be. What does this have to do with the case, huh? I'm like just trying to process in my head. I don't know. Um, let's see here. I don't know what the wage and hour people will be once all the data is filled. I suppose the three of us could go into the penitentiary or go broke. In talking about it with other small businessmen around town, I'm encouraged to believe we shall somehow survive. Most of them claim to have had more harassing experiences, and they are still operating at the old stand. Furthermore, they assure me that this is only the beginning, as I can expect another man from Wage and Hour along any day to check on the first one, and ultimately a third to check on the second. And, after all, I haven't been checked out by the State Department of Labor or the unemployment compensation people, not to mention the income tax man and the FBI. There is, of course, one possible solution. We can close the paper. Okay, so they just this is just like a newspaper scan and they just cut it off. How big is this section? All right. I know just because I won't be able to wake up tomorrow morning, I'm gonna do it like probably depending one more page and call it a night. I'll just finish the story on my own. If you do want to read it for yourself, there's the title. And yeah, bro, I actually just can't believe I'm doing this right now. I'm just reading out loud for 0 viewers. 0 viewers, let's go! What? I understand this. The other one I didn't understand. That was just a bunch of load of symbolism and colors and repeated words. It's more so like a poetry story. Anyway, so this is just continued along. Husband and all her folks had gone on before. What was there to be so happy to live for anymore? She had writ that letter to Miss Celestine the very first day that she had been placed in jail. 3 weeks had gone by on their rusty ankles, and never one word from her Celestine. Laura Lee choked back a sob and gritted her teeth. You had to bear what she was placed on your back for you to tote. Laura Lee Kimball, the judge was saying, you were charged with serious felonies, and the law must take its course according to the evidence. You refused the lawyer that court of You refused a lawyer that the court offered to provide for you, and that was a mistake on your part. However, you have a right to be sworn and tell the jury your side of the story. Tell them anything that might help you, so as long as you tell the truth. Laura Lee, uh, yeah, friends in group chat. Laura Lee made no move to get to her feet, and nearly a minute passed. Then the judge leaned forward. Believe it or not, Laura Lee, this is a court of law. It is needful to hear both sides of every question before the court can reach a conclusion and know what to do. Now, you don't strike me as a person that is unboggling at all. I believe if you knew, you would be helping me out a great deal by telling me your side of the story. Would you do it? Involuntarily, Laura Lee smiled. She stood up. Yes, sir, Mr. Judge. If I can be of some help to you, I sure will. And I thank you for asking me. Being duly sworn, Laura sat in the chair to face the jury as she had been told to. Your jury, gentlemens, they asked me if I was guilty or no. They asked me if I was guilty or no, and I still don't know whether I is or not. I am a unlearned woman and common clad. It doesn't surprise me to find out I'm ignorant about a whole heap of things. I ain't never rubbed the hair off my head against no college walls and schooled out nowhere at all. All I'm able to do is tell you, you gentlemens, how it was, and then you can tell me if I'm guilty or no. I would not wish to sit up here and lie. I would not wish to set up here and lie and make out that I never hit this. Is this the same quote? I think so. And never hit this plaintiff back. Gentlemens, I ain't had no malice in my heart against the plaintiff. I seen him only one time before he come there and commenced that fracas with me. That was 3 months ago, the day after Tom, my husband, died. Miss Calstein called up the funeral home, and they come to got Tom to fix him and they come to got Tom to fix him up so we could take him back to Georgia to lay him to rest. That's where us all come from. Chatham County, Savannah, that is. Now then, Miss Calistine, done something I never know to her to do before. She put on her things and went off from home without letting me know where she was bound for. She come back after a while with this plaintiff, which I had never seen before in all my born days. I glimpsed him good from the kitchen where I was at, walking over to the dining room and the living room with Miss Calistine and looking at things. But they was sort of talking low, like, and I couldn't make out a word they was talking about. I figured that Miss Calistine must have been kind of beside herself, showing somebody look black, showing somebody look like this plaintiff all her fine things like that. Her things is fine and very scarce old and very scarce old antiques, and I know that she had been offered vast sums of money for him, but she would never agree to part with none. Things that had been handled down in the Bourne Things have been handled down in both the Beaufort and the Cherbourne families from way back. That little old mentioning $600 that the plaintiff mentioned wouldn't even be worth one piece of her things, not to mention her silver. After a while, they went off when Miss Celestine come back. She told me that everything had been taken care of and that she had the tickets to Savannah in her purse. Um, let's see here. About an hour in. Yeah, honestly, I didn't realize how much reading it was gonna be, so I think I am gonna end it here. If I do get more stories for my creative writing class, I'm probably not gonna end up reading them. I'm also probably gonna skim through the story so that way I know what it's about and I can not pause as much. So that way, like, I don't know, it's more fluent if I know that there's probably something I shouldn't read on stream, all that stuff. But yeah, here's the name of the story. So it's probably just gonna be science fiction from now on if I do this again. But yeah, ending it here. Bye.